America is more disabled than it has ever been before. Despite advances in medical technology, better treatments, and a better understanding of nutrition and health, the size of the disabled population has grown by more than 30% within the last 5 years alone, despite the total population only growing by 3%. For 3 years after COVID, the number of disabled people in America was growing faster than the number of people in America. In some counties across the country, more than 1 in 3 people are out of work due to a disability, and support payments are now the second largest budget item for the Social Security Administration after retirement benefits. Disability payments now cost more money every year than food stamps and welfare combined by a significant margin. In some towns across America, banks and stores stay open late for one night a month, the day that disability checks become available. This is clearly a big enough problem by itself, but there is a lot more going on behind these numbers which tell a rather scary story about everything. From the ways we decide if people are worthy to work, regional inequality, and the long-term realities of AI in the workplace. I know it sounds unhinged, but I promise, it's all connected. You might not believe it, but people didn't magically just become more disabled overnight, nor are certain areas of the country somehow just 400% more accident-prone than others. So, why the f*** has America really become so disabled?
Daniel Waldrip suffered with chronic back pain for 20 years.
It was getting progressively worse through the years. It just became part of life.
Employment rate for U.S. workers with disabilities increased to about 12.6%.
Proposed cuts to Medicaid are creating a deep sense of fear among 15 million Americans with disabilities who rely on that program.
Back pain is the second most common reason that people go to the doctor in the United States and the leading cause of disability in Americans under the age of 45.
One of the recent challenges of addressing the disability epidemic is that nobody really wants to acknowledge it for 2 separate reasons. The first is that there really are a lot of vulnerable people out there that genuinely need this assistance to survive. I hope it's not too much of a hot take to say that if we can afford more aircraft carriers than the rest of the world combined, we can afford to look after our own people. But even just daring to question the validity of some of these numbers is a dangerous game, because no politician wants to be seen pushing society's most vulnerable people off vital support. Not directly anyway, and we will get to that later. The second and more honest reason is that people who are out of work due to disability do not show up on unemployment statistics. To be officially classified as unemployed, you need to not have a job and be actively looking for work, adhering to some pretty rigid requirements. People who are disabled enough to receive support payments normally don't meet these requirements even if they are willing to work, so they just get counted as outside the labor force. If this was thoroughly reclassified, it might reveal that job losses are a fair bit worse than we would all like to admit. And spoiler alert, there may be a reason why spikes in disability applications line up almost perfectly with spikes in long-term unemployment. But I am getting ahead of myself. The first thing you need to know is exactly what kind of disabilities we are getting. A report by NPR and data from the Social Security Administration found that diagnoses of disabled workers had changed dramatically over the decades, and these changes were not what you would expect. From when the data was first collected to when the report was published, the rate of heart disease, stroke, neurological disorders, and broadly defined other disabilities all dropped significantly. This is surprising because since the 1960s, the average American has put on a few pounds, to put it lightly.
What exactly are you trying to say?
What exactly am I trying to say? These are a bunch of fucking elephants.
Anyway, it's good to know that as someone who personally enjoys some high fructose corn syrup from time to time, both the reduction in cardiovascular and neurological disorders was thanks to improved treatments, which means that medical issues that would have made people unemployable in the 1960s can now be managed effectively enough that people can live totally normal lives. This is particularly impressive when you remember that you can't be disabled if you are dead. Improving the survivability of something like a heart attack also increases the likelihood of that person being disabled by the incident instead of just killed by it. So medical treatments have improved and then improved even more to overcome the problems caused by their statistical improvements. With such amazing new technology and procedures, we should surely be living through a golden age of health, right? But clearly, we aren't. So then what has taken their place and made up most of the increases in disability? Well, it's been mental illness, which isn't surprising since we have gotten much better at diagnosing these. But above all, by a wide margin, the biggest increase has been in back pain and other spinal problems, which are now more than 4 times as common as they were back when we started collecting this data. These are now the most common diagnoses that make people unable to work, at least so far as the government is concerned. Now, it's at this point that you might understandably get a bit suspicious of the data, because conveniently, these kinds of disabilities don't show as many physical symptoms and therefore are a lot easier to fake. This is especially suspicious if everybody within a local area is all coming down with the same disabilities when just a few counties over, people don't seem to have the same problems. To make matters worse, I am going to guess that most of you know someone who can still get a day's work done despite their back pain. Well, the author of this report, Hannah Jaffe-Walt, actually thought the same thing. So they went to interview a doctor in one of the most disabled counties in the country and got a pretty startling insight into how this whole system actually worked. One of the doctor's primary concerns was what level of education his patients had attained. According to the report, he very candidly explained that even though this was not a medical question, it was one of the most important variables when it came to treating disabling illnesses. People who had graduated high school or obtained a college degree had a much better chance of finding a job where they could sit down if they needed to, like those in an office or even just a call center. People who did not have a formal education, however, would most likely be working jobs behind a counter, making deliveries, or doing manual labor where they were expected to be on their feet all day. Someone with chronic back pain could work an office job, but even a retail job that required them to stand for an entire shift would be impossible. In the interview, the doctor rather hauntingly said that if you have particular back pain and a college degree, you're not disabled. Without a college degree, you are. This was a bigger problem in poorer, rural, working-class areas where sit-down jobs were more scarce anyway, which is just one of the reasons why disability lines up almost perfectly with poverty. People in poor areas are not necessarily more disabled. They just have fewer options outside of giving up and claiming disability. But that is just one reason, and it's clearly still the sign of a broken system that's not really helping anybody. And the worst part is that a lot of these problems would be extremely easy to fix without spending nearly as much. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what these convenient numbers are really covering up. This video was made possible by Plod. Have you ever walked out of a meeting thinking, what did we even talk about for the last half hour? Or maybe you've had moments where you really wanted to take notes, but you were too busy actually being present. It's the difference between a meeting that's actually worthwhile and something that should have been just an email. Luckily, there's a solution. It's called the Plod Note Pen, an AI tool that actually helps you do better work instead of just replacing work with generated slop. Plod builds cutting-edge tools that help you stay focused on the moment by taking care of all your note-taking and summarizing. The Note Pen is one of their standout products. It's a small wearable device that you clip onto your shirt bag or lanyard. With one press, it records your conversations, voice memos, and meetings, then transcribes and organizes them into smart summaries you can review later. You can use it during your lectures, meetings, interviews, anytime you need to capture everything. I've been using my Note Pen on my morning walks when creative ideas hit. Instead of stopping to grab my phone or scramble for a notebook, I just tap the Note Pen, talk it out, and later in the app, it's all turned into a clear mind map or action list. It saved me so much mental load. It allows you to take notes anywhere, anytime. It extracts insights, boosts efficiencies, and saves you time, and you can fully engage in any conversation. You can check it out and get yours using the link in the description. The NPR article that first reported on the questionable relationship between disability and poverty was first published over a decade ago now. Now, it's still genuinely one of the best pieces of journalism I have read in a long time, so I will leave a link to it below. However, since then, the number of people receiving disability support payments has actually gone down, especially amongst people of working age, which sounds like a good thing, right? Well, not exactly. Since 2014, when support payments peaked, the number of disabled people has increased by more than 7 million, and we still don't have concrete data on people suffering from symptoms of long COVID. So with more disabled people, but less people getting disability support, the actual improvements have really just been made in bureaucracy. According to data from the Social Security Administration itself, the fastest growing group of applicants are those waiting to see if they are eligible to receive support payments at all. Just the statistical increase in administrative delay accounts for almost all of the reductions seen in people on disability support. Successive governments have realized that cutting down on staff at the Social Security Administration not only reduces costs from the payroll itself, but it also means that there are less people available to process support requests, which conveniently saves money in a less direct way. According to the administration's own data, visualized by the Urban Institute, wait times for people just seeing if they are eligible for support have more than doubled. And in certain states, people are now waiting for over a year just to see if they can be technically qualified as disabled to qualify for support. People who genuinely need the support don't normally have the means to wait this long, so they are just giving up and either relying on family or falling into poverty. The rest of the reduction in disability support is made up of people who are denied on technical grounds rather than medical grounds. According to the law firms that regularly process these claims, the hoops to jump through in order to receive support have become significantly more difficult, and denials can be made for any number of reasons at any point throughout the year-long process. The reason for these denials can include not adhering to a regular treatment schedule, which does sound reasonable, but can be almost impossible for people without insurance or an income. Another reason could be moving in with family members while waiting for support. If their household income is too high, it can be grounds for denial. Since these reports are coming out of law firms, there is also some natural selection bias towards claimants who can, well, afford to pay for lawyers. This is yet another reason why wealthier areas tend to have lower reported rates of disability. In places with better job opportunities, it becomes worth it to pay for support in order to maintain gainful employment. Disability payments are not going to cover the cost of living in most areas with even a moderate cost of living. And in poorer areas, treatments are going to cost more than most people will pay in taxes from even a full-time job. So unfortunately, the simplest solution has become to just throw some cash their way and ignore the problem. Now, the federal government has pushed back on this trend because they saw it becoming a massive cost center that was just being abused. And hot take alert, they were absolutely right, just not in the way you might expect. There are a lot of people who are making a lot of money off the so-called disability industrial complex. It's just not the people receiving the payments themselves. The first group is a growing roster of consulting firms. Unemployment welfare costs are paid in part by state governments. This was pushed heavily by the federal government as a way to motivate state governments to get their people back to work. This did work to bring down the people on this type of support, but not really in the way that old Billy Boy might have hoped. States quickly realized that they had to share the cost of unemployment benefits, but not disability benefits. This created an opportunity for private consulting companies to work with state governments to go through their welfare rolls to try and find people that could qualify as disabled. According to a specific example from the NPR report, Missouri was paying these firms $2,300 per person who they could move off of unemployment benefits and onto disability benefits. Since these consulting firms were paid on a per-person basis, they would allegedly talk to people directly and give them advice on how to play up their symptoms and think of additional medical problems they might have. For the state, it was a great deal because they wouldn't have to pay to cover for these services anymore, and they would have more federal funding coming into the state through disability payments. This lets state politicians talk about their fiscally conservative credentials by actively exploiting welfare programs. Clearly, for the country at large, this was not a good idea, because most people who receive unemployment benefits eventually rejoin the workforce. People on disability are far less likely even if they would be physically able. The second group that have really benefited from all of this are the lawyers. Many law offices now specialize exclusively in processing and pushing through disability claims, and the more the system gets bogged down in bureaucracy, the more money they stand to make. So yeah, yet another system that was originally made to perform a basic function that has been corrupted by misaligned incentives, and now it's too profitable to repeal. Throw in some depressing graphs and welcome to basically every video on this channel. However, the bigger problem with the disability industrial complex is what it's covering up. The job market has clearly changed a lot since we started playing these games with welfare back in the mid-1990s. China entered the World Trade Organization, and outsourcing pushed entire regions into redundancy. The idea for a long time was that people would be retrained into more technical roles to replace the basic manufacturing jobs that were lost. For individuals who had spent their entire lives working with their hands, it was a bit optimistic to expect them to just learn to code. And for certain regions, it has been devastating. Those who could leave areas in the Rust Belt already have. Predominantly younger workers followed job opportunities, and according to the data, they are earning good incomes compared to the national average. Those who were left behind have suffered as opportunities have gone elsewhere alongside young, educated workers. People aren't more likely to be disabled in these areas. They are just more likely to be in the group that stays. Today, however, the script is reversing once again. People who have spent their lives learning to code or perform basically any job where they sit behind a computer are being told they are right on the edge of being replaced by AI, so they better start learning to work with their hands again. As I was researching this very video, Marvin Ellison, the CEO of Lowe's, made headlines for telling his employees to stay away from the corporate office and as close to the cash register as possible if they didn't want to be laid off and replaced by AI. That's a little bit tone deaf from the guy that will be doing the laying off. But if the promises of the AI CEOs are to be believed, he might not be wrong. The problem is that this could further expose the disability gap, because remember, there are lots of disabled people that can work behind a computer, but can't work in physical roles. Now, making big loud warnings about AI systems taking everybody's job is a great way for tech companies to raise a lot of money from people who like the idea of cutting out labor costs, so you need to take these warnings with a bucket of salt. What isn't hypothetical though is that we are getting older. Age naturally makes disability more prevalent, and it's also increasing the expectation that we will work later into our lives at the same time. The demographic problems that come with an aging population are far beyond the scope of this video. But so far as being able to get to work as we get old, there are some simple realities we need to accept. Some jobs can easily be done into old age, others cannot. According to the Harvard Law Review, the average age of a federal court judge is now 69 years old, 2 years above the normal retirement age outlined by the Social Security Administration. And don't even get me started on the Senate. Anyway, these are prestigious jobs that are not physically demanding and come with a lot of support built in. A job like a roofer or boilermaker is simply not going to be as easy for older people to do. If we want people to start skilling into more physical jobs, we also need to accept that they will not be able to work as long, or else all of the problems with our current disability system are going to get exponentially worse. But it doesn't need to be this extreme. There are a lot of easy, and best of all, cheap changes that could be made right now that would go a long way to unfucking this mess. Letting retail workers sit at checkouts instead of standing in place all day immediately makes one of the most common jobs in the country far more accessible. So does encouraging businesses to let people work from home. Right-to-sit laws do exist for already disabled people as a reasonable accommodation. But in the real world, that puts them at a disadvantage when trying to get or keep a job where standing is the expectation. Right-to-sit laws actually used to be universal for everybody across almost every single state, but they were slowly repealed because large employers, in particular McDonald's Ray Kroc, lobbied state governments arguing that it made workers look unprofessional and lazy, using slogans like, "If you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean." Simple changes like this won't fix the problem entirely, but they will help without costing much, and they should be politically popular too. To the people that think assistance recipients are just ripping off the taxpayer, this gets rid of an excuse, and to everybody else, it makes it easier to get their work done, all while helping people help themselves. But of course we won't do it, because business incentivizes bad decisions. Go and watch this video next to find out why we keep on making the same kind of dumb mistakes, and why they are so hard to correct, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.